Hello, everybody attending the 12th Annual Cal State University Fullerton Geological Research Day. My name is Nestor Esparza, and I'll be presenting my thesis proposal for this upcoming school year. My area of study will include the cities of Tustin and Santa Ana, with a focus on the business/industrial sector that resides in between them, right off the 55 freeway. This area is densely populated with factories and large buildings that are releasing inorganic chemical compounds into the aquifer beneath. Through public well data, it is evident that this is a region with rapidly increasing concentrations of nitrate, perchlorate, tetrachloroethene, and chromium in the groundwater. I first became interested in water chemistry as a child when I got a fish tank and I had to learn about the nitrogen cycle and how to complete the nitrogen cycle. This experience as a child came for a circle when I learned that we humans deal with the same water chemistry issues on a macro scale all the time. I became interested and began to seek areas in my local vicinity experiencing groundwater chemistry issues to study for my research thesis. I started by looking at the information available on the Orange County Water District, or OCWD. The OCWD is responsible for monitoring, capturing, and providing safe water to the residents of Orange County. The OCWD requires that each city in the OC provides an annual report on the contaminants in the groundwater and in the final treated water that is ready to the public. There were high concentrations of nitrogen being reported for Santa Ana and Tustin, and this is what initially caught my eye. After learning about this, I went to the Groundwater Ambient Monitoring and Assessment Program, or GAMMA, and used the groundwater information system they have available. That information system contains tons of data points for wells and information regarding the findings in those wells. When I looked at well data for the cities of Tustin and Santa Ana, it was easy to pinpoint several areas of large amounts of inorganic solvents in the groundwater below. When I went and referenced back to the OCWD, I learned about the South Basin plume. It is a solvent plume that exists in the aquifer beneath the industrial sector in these cities. The solvent plume has formed underneath due to human activities releasing said chemicals into the ground. The Orange County Water District does not specify where the contaminants causing the plume are coming from, but it is specified that they are from private businesses operating in the area. These businesses have not been formally required to stop releasing these chemicals into the ground and have been negligent of the issue up until today. Because of this, the plume has been allowed to expand throughout both cities. In Orange County, we currently have two recognized solvent plumes, the North Basin plume and the South Basin plume. This North Basin plume is much larger than the South Basin plume, and as a result, the government has taken federal oversight to enforce that remedial investigations and feasibility studies be conducted to create action that can be taken to reduce solvent concentrations in the groundwater in that area. The South Basin, on the other hand, does not have federal oversight. This leaves the issue up to the local groundwater remediation services to address and tackle. In our case, that is the OCWD. Every 3 months, the OCWD provides an updated report on the South Basin plume, and as of January 2021, feasibility studies are being conducted to determine the possible ways they can better remediate the groundwater. I hypothesize that the fate and transport of these contaminants are currently affecting the local water supplies of these cities. I will use existing and future well data, as well as official city documents that provide land use information to better understand the issue above and below the surface. I hope my future findings can be used by both the cities of Santa Ana and Tustin to help create better ways of removing chemical contaminants from their local water supplies. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Julia Hernandez, and I am conducting research with Dr. Carlin on sedimentation rates of a marred coastal wetland throughout the restoration process. Coastal wetlands provide various ecosystem services, including protection against sea level rise, which is projected to increase over the next century due to global climate change. As population continues to grow, coastal wetlands serve as a line of defense against sea level rise, and in order to carry out normal functioning, these ecosystems must have adequate sediment delivery rates. Sediment provides the foundation on which vegetation can grow on and contributes to the biogeochemical feedback loops that drive vertical migration of tidal marshes. Under stable conditions, vertical migration is a normal response to sea level rise. However, a vast majority of coastal wetlands today are unstable due to the disrupted sedimentation rates caused by anthropogenic stressors, such as upstream damming, channelization, and other human activities within coastal watersheds. Furthermore, the decline of coastal wetlands may inhibit their ability to provide flood protection in the face of sea level rise. Therefore, restoration is needed in order to return to normal wetland functioning, and this process requires a comprehensive understanding of the natural functioning of these ecosystems. To that point, the goal of this project is to measure changes in sediment characteristics that occurred at Eden Land Ecological Reserve located in South San Francisco Bay. This wetland was once used for salt harvesting and is now in a post-restoration state where enough sediment has built up and appears to be stabilized. However, questions remain in terms of sediment characteristics as to whether it has returned to equilibrium post-restoration. If it has returned to equilibrium, how long did this process take? This is a question that may help plan and manage critical restoration projects in the future. The aerial image on the right shows the multiple tidal marshes of San Francisco Bay, where the ones outlined in red are still currently used for salt harvesting, and the ones shaded in green have been restored to their natural conditions. Eden Land Ecological Reserve is located on the uppermost part of the map labeled E Ponds and acts as the main basin for the Alameda Creek. The organization behind the rehabilitation of these former salt ponds is the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project, which has installed structures such as levees, berms, and islands to facilitate sediment accretion at this site. The study I am conducting at Eden Land Ecological Reserve involves investigating sediment characteristics throughout the marsh restoration process and determining the time needed for restoration. The goal of this project is to determine how the sediment has adapted from salt harvesting period through rehabilitation and after returning to stable conditions, using sediment cores collected from mudflats and marsh areas within the reserve. The images to the right here show an area of the reserve before and after restoration, where vegetation has grown back and is now contributing to the biochemical feedback loops that allow vertical migration and may help offset sea level rise in the future. The 3 sediment cores that I am analyzing have now been prepped by various chemical treatments in order to remove organic matter. Now I am currently analyzing inorganic sediment grain sizes using the Malvern Mastersizer laser diffraction system. And I expect grain sizes to change with depth as this area has been subjected to various environmental conditions such as disturbance, restoration, and now hopefully equilibrium. And this concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kim Perkins, and I'll be presenting my undergraduate thesis proposal on the Union Wash Formation in Darwin, California. I'll be analyzing the uppermost upper member to determine the depositional environment and environmental conditions at the time these rocks were deposited, which was during the recovery period following the end Permian mass extinction. So the end Permian mass extinction was the largest extinction event in the last 540 million years, wiping out up to 84% of global marine life. Average global temperatures on land may have been close to 40 degrees Celsius, which was far too high for life on Earth to withstand, and certainly contributed to driving the extinction. These high global temperatures also raised surface water temperatures in the oceans, forcing life down into deeper, cooler waters. However, widespread ocean anoxia forced life up into shallower waters also. So life ended up being squeezed into narrow, hospitable zones in the ocean. One of these hospitable zones is preserved in the Union Wash Formation in Darwin, California. The Union Wash Formation preserves a period of recovery after the end Permian mass extinction, but biotic recovery was set back repeatedly by anoxic environments, as opposed to typical gradual recovery, which gives an interesting point of view on recovery periods. It is a lower Triassic sedimentary marine deposit, representing the outer continental margin of Pangaea and a shallow to deep depositional environment. On the maps here, you can see it lies just near Death Valley National Park. The Union Wash Formation consists mainly of micritic limestones and siltstones. It is divided into 3 members, and the uppermost portion of the upper member will be the focus of my research. It consists of 30 meters of bioturbated micritic limestone, wacky stone, and packstone. This section is known to contain flat pebble conglomerates, seafloor cements, and bivalve, ammonite, and other marine fossils. Overlying this unit is 62.5 meters of unfossiliferous calcareous siltstone, and above that is 64.5 meters of massive micritic limestone. Not much is known yet about these uppermost units, which is why we're going to go see what they're all about. Here's another photo of the locality region that we're going to be analyzing. To determine what kind of environment we're looking at, we'll go to the Darwin locality and make some field observations. We will be collecting about 50 samples, and we'll take one about every 5 meters of the 127 meter thick section. We will cut and polish at least 10 of these samples, and we'll be analyzing them in thin section under a microscope. We're expecting to determine whether it is a shore face setting, a deeper location below wave base, or a lagoon, based on these observations. We also hope to determine not just what sort of depositional environment the upper 127 meters of the Union Wash Formation are, but also environmental conditions in the region during the recovery period following the end Permian mass extinction. And that in turn may be able to help us anticipate what the recovery period of our current 6th mass extinction will look like. The present may be the key to the past, but the past may very well be the key to the future. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Caitlin Bates, and my advisor is Dr. Vali Mamidi. Today, I'll be presenting my undergraduate thesis on the timing and magma source of the Sonora Dike Swarm and Standard Pluton, Sonora, California, in comparison to other Jurassic dike swarms in the Sierra Nevada batholith. The east-west trending Sonora Dike Swarm in Sonora, California is not well known or understood. So for this study, we wanted to determine the timing and source of the Sonora Dike Swarm, as well as its relation to other Sierran dike swarms. In addition, we wanted to see what insights our findings could provide into the mantle, crust, and geologic setting at the time of dike emplacement. So for a small introduction to this setting. Subduction was occurring off the west coast of North America throughout most of the Mesozoic, but there was a brief period of extension during the late Jurassic. This extension allowed for the emplacement of dike swarms, such as the Sonora Dike Swarm. The most well-known of these dike swarms is the Independence Dike Swarm. This extensive feature stretches over 500 kilometers from the Mojave Desert all the way to the eastern Sierra Nevada batholith. It's been dated at around 148 million years old, and it has a wide range of isotopic values and compositions. Another dike swarm is the King Creek dikes. They intrude the King Creek Pluton in the central Sierra Nevada batholith and have been dated at approximately 152.5 million years old. They have a smaller range of isotopic values and bimodal compositions. And finally, the Sonora Dike Swarm intrudes metasedimentary host rocks and the Standard Pluton, which is located in the western Sierra Nevada batholith. These dikes show mafic lithologies, with the Pluton being more dioritic to granodioritic. I used several research methods to investigate the Sonora Dike Swarm and Standard Pluton for this project. First, field observations and samples were collected from Sonora, California. Select samples of both the dikes and the Pluton were crushed and separated to isolate zircons. Laser ablation inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry was used to obtain uranium-lead zircon ages, and cathodoluminescence imaging was used in this process to distinguish between zircon cores and rims. Select samples of the dikes in Pluton were also powdered and sent to a lab for analysis using thermal ionization mass spectrometry to determine their strontium and neodymium isotopic values. And finally, all samples were cut into rock chips and sent to be made into thin sections, which we then analyzed with a petrographic microscope. In the field, the mafic dikes were observed to have a mingling relationship with the standard Pluton, seen in figures 7a and 7b. Petrography showed dioritic to granodioritic mineralogies for the standard Pluton, as well as green schist facies alteration of the Sonora dikes, shown in figure 8. The only sample to contain zircon was the standard Pluton, and it yielded a uranium lead age of 162.27 million years old, shown in figure 9. And finally, isotopic values of strontium and neodymium are shown in the plot in figure 10, with the Sonora dikes and standard Pluton represented by the green and purple triangles, respectively. To show a comparison to the other Jurassic dike swarms, the King Creek dikes and Independence dikes have been included as well, with the King Creek dikes represented by the orange circles and the Independence dikes represented by the ellipse in the lower right. And so, both field observations and petrography revealed that the Sonora dike swarm is more exclusively mafic and altered compared to the other Jurassic Sierran dikes. And though the standard Pluton was the only sample that yielded zircon, based upon the mingling relationship observed in the field, we conclude that the Pluton and dikes are coeval, and thus the uranium lead age from the Pluton can be applied to the dikes. And from this, we see that the Sonora dikes were in place before the King Creek dikes and the Independence dikes. From the isotopic analysis, we conclude that the Sonora dikes and the standard Pluton, as well as the King Creek dikes, are sourced from depleted mantle with minor crustal or enriched mantle input. Comparatively, the Independence dike swarm has a much more evolved source. From this analysis, coupled with the swarm's geographic locations, we conclude that both the Sonora and King Creek dikes were sourced from a stenospheric mantle, while the Independence dikes were sourced from lithospheric mantle and or the crust. And finally, this new age data extends the Jurassic extensional period to episodic events ranging from 162 to 148 million years ago. Thank you very much for watching my presentation, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Hi, my name is Kati Wiener, and I'm working with Dr. Joe Carlin, documenting changes in terrestrial sediment source to the Monterey Bay over decadal and centennial timescales. The purpose of this study is to characterize sediment source areas within Monterey Bay and to investigate changes in sediment sources over time. The area on the edge of a continent submerged in water is a continental shelf. Continental shelves are often the final sink for sediment routing systems that include terrestrial sediment sources, channels, and the littoral cell systems along the coast. Sediments carried through a littoral cell are typically primarily provided by rivers and streams and then redistributed along the shelf in the direction of longshore transport. Human interaction with the watershed can also have a significant impact on the continental shelf sediment record. Previous studies suggest that human damming of sediment transport pathways and deforestation have caused significant changes in sediment delivery to the continental shelf. Additionally, sediments moving through littoral systems can act as tracers for other materials such as chemicals, pollutants, and nutrients by carrying these materials into the ocean. Therefore, it is important to understand these sediment transport pathways, not only the natural factors that influence these processes, but also anthropogenic factors. This study focused on the Monterey Bay continental shelf located off the coast of Central California. It is primarily fed by three major rivers, the Salinas River, the Pajaro River, and the San Lorenzo River. Sediment delivered to the shelf via these rivers originates in the California coast ranges. The Salinas River provides the most sediment to the bay. The watershed is largely comprised of the riverbed, bottomlands that are dominated today by agriculture, and flanking terraces. The coast of California undergoes an El Niño Southern Oscillation event roughly every 7 years. These events are characterized by heavy rain, higher wave energy, and warmer water conditions. In order to execute this study, we collected sediment cores from the continental shelf offshore in Monterey Bay. We then collected samples from different sediment source areas to the Monterey Bay shelf, such as beaches, rivers, rocky headlands, and dunes, including samples from more northern areas to show what minerals or sediment may be attributed to longshore drift. Following this, we prepared all samples for X-ray fluorescence or XRF analysis. For the XRF analysis, all samples were ground into a fine powder and packed into uniform containers. From the cores, we also extracted separate subsamples from each core interval to date the cores using lead-210, cesium-137, and carbon-14. Using the XRF data from the source samples, we established an elemental fingerprint for these environments and applied those fingerprints to the core samples to look at changes in source over time. We found iron, calcium, and potassium to be the most useful elements in finding unique signatures for each depositional source. The beaches in the area have a higher content of calcium than the Salinas and San Lorenzo River, while the Salinas and San Lorenzo River have a higher potassium content. Rocky Headlands had the lowest iron content and relatively high potassium levels, similar to the potassium levels of the Salinas and San Lorenzo River. Dunes had varying levels of all elements. From these source sediment data, we have established different source fingerprints, and for the purpose of the study, we will only focus on the rivers and beaches. The following graphs display the changes in calcium, potassium, and iron ratios over the last 200 or so years. SR 1707-0207 MC from southern Monterey Bay off the coast of the Salinas River showed a steady shift in source over time. This shift was oriented towards an increase in beach source. PS 1410-11 MC was located in the Central Bay area off the Pajaro River, and PS 1410-04 MC was located north of the bay along the open coast region. Both of these plots showed less of a, if any, trend in change in sources over time. We believe the changes in the Southern Bay and the lack of changes in the other areas of the bay are the result of a greater modification to the sediment routing system and watershed of the Salinas River relative to the other bay watershed. Further, the change is consistent with increases in coastal erosion within the Southern Bay over the last several decades. Therefore, the apparent shift towards a beach source may indicate increased sediment sourced from coastal erosion at the expense of sediment sourced directly from the river. In the end, this project highlighted the elemental difference in sediment source areas throughout the Monterey Bay and demonstrated how watershed modifications can result in changes to the continental shelf sedimentation over time. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Brennan Cugini, and today for Research Day, I'm going to be presenting my thesis project that I did with Sinan. And what we did for this project is that we looked at a set of images, 8 in total, of the high slip segment of the Lavic Lake Fault. And this fault is important because it's one of several main faults that occurs in the Eastern California shear zone. And the last time it went off was in 1999, which resulted in the 7.1 magnitude hectomine earthquake. And the reason for doing the study is because it's a relatively useful application of lidar analysis. And we have 2 sets of lidar for this fault, and the reason why we did this study was because we wanted to compare a set of lidar data that was produced from 2012 and with that produced from 2000. The 2000 data was analyzed by Chen in 2015, but the 2012 data was never analyzed. So this allows us to see historical lidar data for comparison in a desert setting. Now, the methodology that we used was that we took 8 lidar images of the 4.5 kilometer segment of fault that we looked at, and we put it through a program called LiDACAS, which just means the lateral displacement calculator. And what it does is that we take images like we see down here off to the right, we crop them by first pointing at where the fault is, and what the software does is that it cuts the image in half along that line, and then along 2 sides we have a blue feature and a red feature. This correlates to a truncated feature that was split apart due to the right lateral motion of the fault itself. And what the computer does is that it produces profiles of these different segments along either side of the fault, as you can see up here, up to the upper right hand corner, and it tries to match features on either side by highlighting a particular feature along the red side to itself to come up with a calculation for what magnitude was the feature displaced horizontally. And for our results from the LiDAR analysis is that we were able to get 43 measurements that were made along this fault strand. And none of the features were found between my study and Chen Tao's study. And so what this tells us is that the features that were identified in the last study is that they were relatively the same to what I found. The offset measurement values range between 0.5 meters of total horizontal offset to as high as 7.5 meters of horizontal offset. This is to be expected because these are similar figures to what Chen got in his previous study. And since it's a high slope segment of the actual fault, it makes sense that we get high values for here. The distribution was asymmetrical in that, as you can see off to the right over here, the right side of the fault, for like the first 2.5 kilometers, had much more of the actual slip values. We're able to identify much more features onto the first segment of fault than onto the latter segment of fault. That is, the northern section, which is the area from 0 to 2.5 kilometers, had 26 total measurements. Meanwhile, the southern half had only 17 measurements. And for the comparison of Chen data, as I said previously, most of the results plotted with each other with accordance to the error. That is, the error bars themselves overlapped with the actual one line that's produced when I compared Chen and my results onto the same graph. What this tells us is that the geomorphological features in this study area were well preserved and were easily identifiable. That is for the computer and myself to be able to look at and point out and backslip. There were 11 other locations that did not fall within the 1-1 line, and we determined that these were due to projection errors along with other problems that result from geomorphological change over time. But most of them were due to the subtlety of the features that the computer had a difficult time picking up on that resulted in different measurements. 12 field measurements were also identified in the same area, with 6 of them being relatively close to one another, and then 6 of them being really different. So about half of them were the same, but the other half were completely different. And what we can conclude from this study is that, like from Chen results, LiDAR can greatly increase the amount of measurements that we can gather on a particular fault strand. It allows us to get more of an insight into the total movement in a sense of how strong the earthquake was in the past. However, there are weaknesses to LiDAR. That is, subtle features that can be difficult to be picked up by the computer software cannot be properly black-slipped, which could result in discrepancies between results over historical periods of time. Some of the results that were too subtle were actually really found in the field, so therefore, just like in geophysical surveys, what we need to do in the future when using LiDAR in the field is that we need to have both sets of fieldwork and LiDAR results to maximize the potential of both to come up with a better overall analysis of the fault segment that we're looking at. Thank you for your time.
Hello, my name is Theresa, and today I'll be talking about seasonal carbon fluxes within a coastal wetland over a 2-year period. For this project, we have based it on known data from how carbon interacts with an Earth's atmosphere and how it incorporates into the soils of coastal wetlands, as seen in the top figure. Understanding how this natural mechanism removes excess carbon from the atmosphere can help combat climate change. This project was conducted in Eden Landing Ecological Reserve, a restored coastal wetland in San Francisco Bay Area, seen in the bottom photo. We collected samples from 3 habitats: mudflat, low marsh, and high marsh, and the samples were collected approximately 3 to 4 months between July 2018 and August 2020. We first looked at how much organic carbon, or OC, was being added to the new material by weight percent by measuring the percent OC content of the sediment layers within the cores. Along the top are the A sites, and along the bottom are the B sites of each habitat. On the left is the low marsh in blue, red is the high marsh, and yellow is mudflats. And the different sampling periods are distinguished by the shapes noted in the legend along the bottom. Notice how the percent OC changes over time at the surface as seen in the top of each plot, and how there is a larger variation in high marsh than low marsh and mudflats. From the percent OC data, the seasonal sedimentation rates were calculated in grams per meter squared per year for each location using beryllium-7 radioisotopes, and these rates were combined with the percent OC core data to determine seasonal carbon fluxes at each location. The top shows the overall sedimentation rates, and the bottom shows the sediment carbon fluxes. And on the left is A site, and on the right is B site for each habitat. Above the zero line is sediment burial, and below the zero line is sediment loss. ND means that there was no data since those habitats were not sampled at that time, and the colors correspond to the percent OC figures previously seen. From these plots, we can see that sedimentation rates were higher in the low marsh, but carbon fluxes were higher in the high marsh. And for both, there is a decreasing trend in the mudflats. The carbon flux for each habitat was then averaged with sites A and B together in order to determine average seasonal trends. Again, the colors correspond to the percent OC graphs. From this plot, we see that carbon fluxes generally increase in the marsh sites over time, with higher rates in the high marsh, but decrease over time in the mudflats. Even with this decrease in the mudflats, the overall combined average carbon flux for the wetland was 2.7 grams carbon per meter squared per day, which demonstrates that the wetland overall is a net carbon sink. So these overall trends in the carbon fluxes for the marsh and wetland habitats as a whole demonstrate that restoration is working, as increases in seasonal carbon flux to the sediments over time is likely to promote increases in future carbon burial and sequestration. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you all for joining. So today I'll be presenting my thesis, an assessment of carbonate precipitation at the Tabatin Fissure Ridge Hot Spring in Bridgeport, California. So to begin, I'll be going over background information by explaining what is a tabatin. A tabatin is a calcium carbonate mineral that oftentimes forms in association with hot springs. These tabatins are considered to be a result of inorganic and organic processes. Spring waters commonly contain dissolved carbon dioxide that is the gas once fluid reaches low pressure surface environments, providing conditions that are favorable for tabatin mineralization. Tabatin morphology varies widely. Specifically within our study site, we're looking at a fissure ridge hot springs. As you can see in the photos on the right-hand side, these hot springs are characterized by their elongated symmetrical ridges of tabatin. Here, water emerges from a single source into 3 distinct outflow channels into these man-made pools. Although carbon dioxide degassing plays a pivotal role in hot spring morphology in general, direct connections to the morphology of fissure ridge hot springs have not been established, which leads us into our study objective of exploring potential connections among carbon dioxide degassing, fluid agitation, and ridge morphology. The fluids of the Tabatin hot springs were sampled at the orifice along the primary outflow channel and divergent terminal outflow channels to determine the chemical composition of spring waters and assess mineralization mechanisms. The calcium contents were determined by using ICP-OES spectrometer in Dr. Wood's lab. Dissolved inorganic carbon concentrations and isotope compositions were determined by using CRDS spectrometer in Dr. Lloyd's lab. Moving on with our data, the total dissolved carbon dioxide contents, the carbon-13 isotope composition, and the pH were all plotted against distance here. The Tabatin spring waters display increasing carbon-13 isotope values down the outflow of the channel. In correlation with the increase of carbon-13 isotope composition, the total dissolved carbon dioxide contents display a decreasing trend down the outflow of the channel, along with an increase in pH. The more extensive loss of carbon dioxide occurred along the steeper terminal outflow channels, which is seen right here. The contemporaneous increase of carbon-13 isotope values and the decrease in total dissolved carbon dioxide content support our idea of carbon dioxide degassing occurring down the spring primary and terminal outflow channels. The degassing of carbon dioxide is also supported by the recognized increase in pH. All these three data sets imply carbon dioxide degassing. Moving on to Rayleigh fractionation model. The Rayleigh fractionation model is a process when you're removing one product in a chemical reaction from the system. It describes fluid evolution in an equilibrium process. Rayleigh fractionation model helps inform about what processes are dominant or more important. We are using this to assess carbon dioxide degassing. We constrained parameters that fit within our study site into the model equation. The results of the calculation indicated that the measured data corresponded reasonably well within the theoretical carbon dioxide degassing model. As you can see, our measured data is in the blue, follows the nonlinear theoretical carbon dioxide degassing model. The calcite precipitation rate was also calculated here. These precipitation rates are inferred from calcium loss. The calcium loss data was then input into the spring diagram corresponding to where the sampling was taking place. Compared to the other measurements like total dissolved carbon dioxide, carbon-13 isotope composition, and pH all show progressive change. The calcium data does not, which implies that calcite precipitation is not continuous, even along the terminal outflows where agitation-driven degassing is more prevalent, which is here. This highly variable fluid of calcium contents do not support progressive precipitation of calcium carbonate, which leads us to conclude and suggest that other factors may be controlling the morphology and geochemical composition of the Bridgeport Fissure Ridge hot spring. And to end, I would like to express my sense of thanks and gratitude to my thesis advisor, Dr. Sean Lloyd, for his guidance and support throughout this whole research project.
Hi guys, my name is Brian Padilla and today I will be presenting my thesis on the 3D correlation of earthquake event evidence between two trenches at the Bedard fan site along the south-central San Andreas Fault. So the purpose of my thesis consists of reevaluating the earthquake event evidence recorded at two closely spaced trenches, BDT3 and BDT4, at the Bedard fan site in the Carrizo section of the South Central San Andreas Fault. This assessment is done by incorporating and utilizing all structural, geomorphological, and trench evidence provided by recent publications to ultimately come up with unified interpretations of surface deformations associated with the past few earthquakes that have ruptured through the Bedard fan site. And we believe this will be useful for providing additional insight about their formation and preservation. A little background. For the most part, much has changed since the earliest pioneering investigations when describing earthquake evidence. In the past, only the most prominent earthquakes evidence was described and preserved. For instance, and a typical publication in the past would only provide the best preserved evidence, like seen in the blue box. But as studies became more sophisticated, key records such as trench logs and data tables became more common. And now most recent publications provide these individual trench logs and as seen here with all these different earthquake traces at one whole unit of observation. However, that doesn't give us the opportunity to see the full picture when describing the earthquake event. Results. The most recent earthquake, the 1887 earthquake, At BDT3, evidence of the 1853 earthquake shows a distributed faulting pattern with uplift. At Trench 4, it exhibits signs of discrete faulting and fissuring with subsidence. BDT3 is cut across a restraining step over, whereas Trench 4 is cut across a releasing step over. And if you see on the map, in map view, the western fault trace displays a discontinuity between BDT3 and BDT4. As for the penultimate earthquake, BDT3 and BDT4 are both cut across a restraining step over structure, and both main fault traces were likely continuous between BDT and BDT4. Prior to the penultimate earthquake, it cut. You see a restraining step over and a releasing step over across both trenches, and they display discontinuity in the western fault trace. In conclusion, interpretations of the surface deformations in at trenches 3 and 4 suggested that both trenches are in restraining and releasing step over structures. Penultimate earthquake created an elongated disposition center, which partially got uplifted during the 1857 earthquake. And the penultimate earthquake displays a similar deformational style like the one seen in successive events. And this structural complexity is likely the reason why the fault trace cannot be easily correlated between trenches. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Daisy Quiroz. I will be presenting my research regarding the Holocene lake level reconstruction of Big Lake. Research for my thesis is funded by the National Science Foundation and the Lewis-Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation. The objective of my research was to use a sediment core taken close to the lake's edge to reconstruct the Holocene hydrological variability of Big Lake. Lakes and lake basins act as natural archives of paleoenvironment and the forcings that contributed to and changed the environment. Hydrologic variability is connected to the water quality of lake basins, which can reveal changes in precipitation and evaporation. Being able to reliably tell how the paleoenvironment responded to change can help scientists predict how the environment will respond in the future and can prepare human populations in the region and influence the public policies. Big Lake is situated in the northern coast range of California and is located in a Mediterranean climate. The lake is currently shallow with dense aquatic vegetation. The terrestrial vegetation consists mostly of evergreen trees and shrubs with little understory. Part of the methods was the collection of a 2.3 meter Russian core at the edge of the lake. In the image, you can see the location of BIG-LRC 19-5 core in relation to the lake. In the lab, other methods were executed such as visual description, magnetic susceptibility, percent water content, percent total organic matter, and percent clastics. I was not able to get radiocarbon dates due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, so relative dating was used when inferring changes in lake level. 3 drives were taken from the lake. The first drive, measuring between 0 to 85 centimeters in length, consisted of mainly a black to dark brown color and was predominantly organic rich. Though between 70 to 85 centimeters clay sediment was seen, the second drive was 85 centimeters to 149 centimeters. It was chiefly clay sediment with the color ranging from brown to black or gray. There was little organics and visible clastics. The third drive was primarily gray to blue-gray in color and dominated by clayey sediment. Next, we move on to magnetic susceptibility. Magnetic susceptibility is increased with depth, high at the end of the core and low at the top of the core. The percent water content recorded showed high percentages near the top of the core and decreased with depth. total organic matter was low in the past and increased as time moved to the present. With percent clastics, the percentage increased with depth. Between 18 centimeters and 33 centimeters, there is a drastic change noted throughout all the proxies. There is also another significant period of time seen throughout the proxies between 33 centimeters to 74 centimeters. When comparing correlations, the strongest correlations were between percent water content and magnetic susceptibility, percent total organic matter and magnetic susceptibility, percent total organic matter and percent water content, and percent residual and percent total organic matter. Presently, Big Lake is a shallow lake characterized by low magnetic susceptibility, low percent clastics, and high total organic matter. If we take this knowledge and apply it to the past, after all, the present is the key to the past, we can predict that any time there was low magnetic susceptibility, low percent clastics, and high total organic matter, Big Lake had low lake values. Conversely, we can suppose that when high magnetic susceptibility, high percent clastics, and low total organic matter prevailed, Big Lake had high lake levels. Thus, we can extrapolate that Big Lake had high lake levels between 203 centimeters to 116 centimeters, with a decline in lake levels beginning at 116 centimeter core depth. Between 74 centimeters to 33 centimeters, magnetic susceptibility, low percent clastics, and high percent total organic matter was recorded, indicating a period of low lake levels. This change may be indicative of the late Holocene dry period seen throughout the paleolimnological record in the western U.S. However, as radiocarbon dates are not available, this supposition cannot be confirmed. Another notable change occurred between 33 centimeters to 18 centimeters core depth, characterized by high magnetic susceptibility, high percent clastics, and low percent total organic matter, suggestive of high lakes. This data could be indicating the Little Ice Age, but again, dates are not available to confirm this. In conclusion, Big Lake showed itself to be a wealth of knowledge, and its record deserves a more in-depth look. Future work will include radiocarbon dates, grain size, and microfossil analyses. In addition, we'll be comparing this near-shore core to the other core taken in from Big Lake and compare this core record to others in California. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Hello, my name is Alex Valenzuela, and today I'll be talking about the concentric pattern of the Box Springs Pluton located in Riverside, California. So to start, the geologic map to the right is of the entire Box Springs Pluton, mapped by Morton et al. In 2014. The area of the Pluton being discussed in this particular study is circled in red right here. The Box Springs Pluton is Cretaceous in age and is primarily composed of tonalite, granite, and granodiorite. As you can see, it follows a concentric pattern with the youngest units right here in the core, and the oldest units are on the edges of the Pluton. My hypothesis for the study is that the concentric pattern represents a vertical transcrustal volcanic feeder system where the magmas are petrologically related to one another. Onto the methods. The methods used to conduct this study include producing a map of the oldest marginal units on the west side of the Pluton, which cover an area of 1.3 square kilometers at 1 to 10,000 scale, as well as petrographic analysis and XRF whole rock geochemistry analysis, which is still in progress at the moment. Onto the field results, where I found the magmatic foliation to have a pretty consistent strike orientation throughout, striking from the northwest to the southeast and dipping to the northeast towards the core of the Pluton. There are a considerable amount of aplite lucocratic dikes within the KBHG1 unit that strike in the same orientation as the magmatic foliation, but dip in the opposite direction towards the southwest. The contacts between the outermost KBGG unit and the middle KBHG unit are sharp, as seen in the bottom left-hand photo. And the contacts between the middle KBHG unit and the KBHG1 unit to the right are gradational. Now onto the petrographic results, where it was found that all units have a similar relative abundance of quartz, K-feldspar, and plagioclase, but have varying amounts of mafic minerals, mainly within the KBHG1 unit. within localized Schlieren layers, where mafic abundance can reach up to 40% of the rock's total composition. There are many accessory minerals found in all of the units, which include muscovite, hematite, sphene, ilmenite, alunite, which are these top two thin section photos. And there's also garnet, which appears as an accessory mineral within the dikes of the KBHG1 unit. Now onto the conclusions. The units might be petrologically related to one another through fractional crystallization, but for further XRF analysis is needed to say so for sure. The structure of the Box Springs pluton resembles a lopolith, which is illustrated in this bottom photo right here. The geometry of the magma plumbing system is not a simple vertical cylindrical shape, and a transcrustal volcanic feeder system cannot be excluded due to the relationships of the units. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for attending.
Hi, my name is Julia Chen, and I am a first-year master's student at Cal State Fullerton, working with Dr. Mehmeti. Today, I will be presenting on my master's thesis proposal titled Examining the Extent of Magma Mixing in the Tuolumne Intrusive Complex with K-Feldspar Megacrust. My presentation will be broken down into 4 parts. First, I will introduce my research question on magma mixing. Next, I will describe the background of the Tuolumne Intrusive Complex and K-Feldspars in the Tuolumne. Thirdly, I will describe my project goals and hypotheses. And finally, I will outline my methods, which include both the fieldwork and the lab work. My research question is, do magmas mix, and how extensive is magma mixing within a large and long-lived pluton? The figure below illustrated how magmas enter into the crust and amalgamated to form an even larger magmatic bodies. In this process, magma chambers or plutons are able to grow larger incrementally at the emplacement level. But what is still unclear is, do magma mix during the construction of such a pluton? And if so, how extensive is magma mixing within a large and long-lived pluton? To answer my research question, we come to the Tuolumne Intrusive Complex. The Tuolumne Intrusive Complex is located in the eastern Sierra Nevada, California. It is a Cretaceous nested pluton with a surface area of 1,000 kilometers square. The Tuolumne Intrusive Complex can be divided into several units. From the most marginal and oldest unit to the most central and the youngest unit, they are the Kuna-crest granodiorite, the equigranular half-dome granodiorite, the porphyritic half-dome granodiorite, and finally the Cathedral Peak granodiorite. For this project, I will be conducting a mineral scale study of the potassium feldspar in the Tuolumne. Potassium feldspars are unique because the compositional zoning of the potassium feldspar can record magmatic history. And in the Tuolumne, the potassium feldspar increases from less than 1 centimeter in length in the equigranular half dome all the way to 15 centimeter in length in the Cathedral Peak. For this study, I will be focusing on the southeast corner of the Tuolumne Intrusive Complex along a transect from the equigranular half dome all the way to the Cathedral Peak. One previous study on Chambers et al. 2020 showed 2 K-feldspar from the same area with a core that has a zircon age that matches the age of equigranular half dome and the rim of the K-feldspar that matches the age of the Cathedral Peak unit. In addition, there was also a 500,000 age gap between the core and the rim of the K-feldspar. This led the authors to speculate that a interconnected magma chamber existed between the equigranular half dome and the Cathedral Peak unit. The result of this study became the hypothesis of this project. The goal of this project is twofold. First, I want to identify factors that influence the growth of the size of K-feldspar megacrust. And secondly, I want to identify the extent of magma mixing in the tuolumne. With that, my hypothesis is also twofold. First, I hypothesize that the size of K-feldspar megacrust depends on time in the magma and magma mixing. And secondly, the extent of magma mixing in the tuolumne ranges from the equigranular half dome, the porphyritic half dome, to the cathedral peak units. Finally, to solve my research question, I will be using 5 different methods, and they are fieldwork, petrography, zircon geochronology and zircon trace element geochemistry, whole rock geochemistry, and K-feldspar trace element geochemistry. This will conclude my presentation. Thank you for your time and your attention.
Hi, my name is Melanie Nguyen, and this presentation is summarizing the contents of my proposal under Dr. Sean Lloyd. We will be assessing microbially induced sulfate reduction as a precipitation mechanism for carbonate concretions within the Miocene Rincon Shale in California. Carbonate concretions are cemented nodules that form through mineral precipitation in pore space. They typically have this spherical, almost oblong shape to here, as seen in the figure to the left. They are believed to have formed through microbially mediated diagenetic reactions in marine sediments. Now, these diagenetic reactions can act to either degrade organic matter or, in some cases, methane. This graph showcases both delta C13 and delta 34 sulfur. If we follow along the C13 trend, we see it going from being highly negative to highly positive and back down to highly negative once again. Looking to the right, we see the associated microbially induced reactions that would produce these ranges of both carbon and sulfur isotope trends. These pore water trends help to guide our current interpretations of the geochemical composition and formation history of concretions. Negative carbon-13 alone can be accounted for by a variety of different diagenetic reactions, as we see here with sulfate reduction, metal oxide reduction, nitrogen reduction, and anaerobic oxidation of methane. All of these reactions can promote carbonate mineral precipitation. However, it is important that we isolate which specific reaction leads to carbonate concretion precipitation across any system. Analyzing concretion formation by using delta C13 alone is insufficient in telling us by which reaction produces concretions. To solve this problem, we also have to look at carbonate-associated sulfate trends to help us further isolate which reaction is responsible for concretion precipitation. Carbonate-associated sulfate refers to the trace amounts of sulfate that is incorporated into carbonate minerals upon precipitation. Using both carbonate-associated sulfate and C13 trends, we now have 2 isotopic trends to look at in order to isolate which diagenetic reaction leads to concretion precipitation in any given system. Our study site will be the Rincon Shale located in the Santa Barbara region in California. It is an organic rich unit that is clay shale and dolomite dominated and is lower Miocene in age. Now, there isn't much work that has been done to characterize the stratigraphy and concretions found within the Rincon Shale, but thankfully I did find this stratigraphic column by Dibley to show us that the Rincon Shale directly underlies the Monterey Formation. Now, this is significant because there's been a lot of work done on the Monterey Formation and its concretions. Previous work done on the concretions within the Monterey show us that delta C13 cannot isolate the specific reaction that leads to its concretion precipitation when used alone. However, when using delta C13 trends along with carbonate-associated sulfate trends, Lloyd et al. Found that the shale facies within the Monterey contained concretions that formed as a result of sulfate reduction. Therefore, being that the Rican Shale directly underlies the Monterey, we hypothesize that the concretions formed within the Rican Shale also formed as a result of sulfate reduction. Collection methods will include me retrieving softball-sized samples directly from the Rican and prepare them for analysis. The detections will be made prior to geochemical analysis, and after that, carbon isotopes will be determined by using CRDS. Carbonate-associated sulfate will be extracted following the traditional approach developed by Burdett et al. And lastly, sulfur isotopes will be determined by using IRMS. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Good afternoon. My name is Monica Maynard, and I am an environmental hydrogeology graduate student, and I'm here to talk about potential long-lasting effects on water resources on coastal aquifers from an asteroid impact. And I just want to note that although these events don't occur on a regular basis, they could be devastating. So low risk, high consequence events, especially in a populated area. Our water resources, both on the surface and underground, would be affected and disrupted on a massive scale. There is precedent to an event happening on the eastern coast of the United States. Approximately 35 million years ago, an asteroid or comet impacted the Chesapeake Bay region, which influenced the sedimentation or redistribution of sediments in that area. And that has persisted for thousands of years. So in a city like Los Angeles, which already experiences climate, dry climate and drought, one of these impacts would exacerbate water supply problems and potentially destroy the water delivery infrastructure. So I used a web-based computer program to simulate 3 hypothetical objects to assess the potential damage to a coastal city. The different projectile sizes were chosen based on the minimum diameter required to generate a crater on the surface of the Earth that would be deep enough to disturb the water table. The subsequent objects were simply multiplied by a factor of 10. So we have 3 objects, 30 meters in diameter, 300 meters in diameter, and 3,000 meters in diameter, respectively. And the results from the 3 hypothetical inputs yield the amount of energy released, crater dimensions, and major and regional global changes. The main thing I want to point out is that all of these hypothetical objects would surpass the 10-meter average of groundwater depth, water table depth. Also, we make the assumption that this is a simple crater, so no complex geometries. The values chosen for the analysis were based on values compared to known values from previous impacts, which are shown here on the graph. And so in order to calculate the impact rate, I took the density and calculated the mass to find the impact rate. And these are images of what a final crater would look like for a 30-meter object and for a 300-meter object and a 3,000-meter object. So you can see that they grow substantially. What I did not look at were the ejecta, the effects of the ejecta, the air blast, or seismicity. Some of the effects on groundwater is the disruption of the water table, which would not be allowed for consumption. An impact could also drastically alter already contaminated sites below the surface and might allow migration of these contaminants. The development of new contamination sites could also be a possibility by like leaking containers or underground tanks. Liquefaction and land subsidence can also produce flooding and structure damages. And another groundwater effect would be saltwater intrusion in coastal aquifers. In conclusion, these asteroid impacts don't occur as frequently as earthquakes, so that's a good thing, but they can have long-lasting high consequences in populated areas. The actual results from one of these events could be worse than the scenarios presented here, and we would not have water available for consumption right away. And as groundwater increases in the LA basin, and as public water utilities increasingly rely on groundwater aquifers as sources of drinking water, additional information about the infrastructure updates is needed for future management of these resources. Further investigations on the specific effects of groundwater resources and their extent over long periods of time due to a meteor impact are needed to prepare emergency response teams as well as the public. Thank you.